As we continue to speak of US President Donald Trump, when he returned to the White House, cutting government waste and reducing the US deficit were central parts of his economic pitch. His administration created DOGE, with Elon Musk initially targeting as much as $1 trillion in annual spending cuts. Trump also spoke about reducing what he called wasteful government spending. But the debt trajectory has moved in the opposite direction. U.S. federal debt stood at around $37.64 trillion at the end of 2025. By August of this year, it had climbed to almost $40 trillion, an increase of roughly $2.3 trillion in just over 7 months. At the same time, Trump's administration pushed through major tax cuts and higher defense spending. The result is a U.S. government that continues to borrow heavily, despite the administration's promise to bring spending under control. That rising debt is now colliding with a more expensive borrowing environment. The U.S. Treasury sold $25 billion of 30-year bonds at a 5.2% yield just last week. This is the highest auction yield for that maturity since the year 2001. The significance is not simply that yields are high, it is that the U.S. has to refinance an enormous existing debt pile while continuing to run large deficits. The Congressional Budget Office now expects a $2.1 trillion deficit for fiscal 2026, roughly $200 billion more than its earlier estimate. Higher yields mean new borrowing costs, and as older debt matures, refinancing also becomes increasingly expensive. That creates a feedback loop. Bigger deficits mean more borrowing can mean higher yields, and higher yields mean a bigger interest bill. And this is exactly where Japan and the yen enter the picture. In an unusual move earlier, the US and Japan coordinated intervention to support the yen, with Japan buying yen and the US Treasury also participating. So the question is, why does the US care if yen falls to multi-decade lows? Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said it's to help its allies, but the bigger story is that Japan is the world's biggest holders of US Treasury securities. This means the relationship between the yen, the dollar, and Treasury markets has global consequences. A sharp fall in the yen can encourage Japanese investors to move money back home, potentially reducing demand for US assets. Other major holders are already shedding dollar exposure, a phenomenon spearheaded by China, with dollar holdings hitting 18-year low in the month of June. So the story now is no longer simply about a $40 trillion debt pile, but about whether the US can keep borrowing at affordable rates while pursuing tax cuts, defense spending, and overseas military commitments. And with Treasury yields now at multi-decade highs, the cost of that strategy is becoming harder to ignore.